A lot of you guys have asked me to show how I use the openings that I share with you in my own Blitz game, so there you go. Today I'd like to cover one of my favorite openings for Blitz, which is the opening B3. It's a very universal opening because you can use the exact same setup as black when you're playing B6 on the first move. And there we go with the first game. I'm playing white, B3, E5, bishop B2. So here you can already see that this bishop starts to put pressure on black, and the pawn needs to be defended. Now I play pawn to E3, enabling for the other bishop to go out and put some pressure over that diagonal. D5, bishop B5. Now this knight is pinned down to the king, and therefore this pawn on E5 is in fact undefended, and white threatens to capture it on the next move. Therefore black defends it with the bishop. Knight F3, and white is once again threatening to capture this pawn, because remember this knight is pinned and can no longer move. It's interesting how this opening, which is similarly kind of covered opening at first when you play just B3 and B2, but you can see that white starts creating threats at pretty much every turn very early in the game, and it's quite annoying for black, frankly. So black played queen E7, now the center is solidified, and white played pawn to D4, just putting even more pressure to this pawn. Actually, in this position, pawn C4 is also good, undermining black's center that way, and pawn D4 is the other way to do that. So pawn D4, now this pawn is once again attacked. Black decided to capture it over here. If the pawn moves forward, the knight does not have to retreat back, he can move forward. So, this knight is pinned once again, so white keeps putting pressure. In the game, black decided to capture on D4, and here it's funny that Stockfish in this position, strangely enough, recommends to not capture this pawn at all, but to castle. That's quite nice. Although I could have captured it with a knight, bishop, or a queen. Stockfish says that castling is the best, kind of aiming for, I guess, open up the e-file and then use it. Now, that's too creative for me, so I just played a more simple move, queen takes d4. And it's in style of an opening, because one of the key ideas is just to use the power of this fianchettoes bishop to put pressure along this diagonal. And you see that right now, queen takes g7 is coming. By the way, these games, as well as other games that I'm about to share with you today, these are bullet games, 1-minute games, but you can see that when you know common patterns of this opening, it's simple to play these moves, you can do that unthinkingly. Also, the queen from here attacks this pawn on d5, therefore black played knight f6 to defend it, and I played knight to c3, once again threatening to capture this pawn, because I'm attacking it twice, and black defends it only once. This knight is still pinned, still cannot capture the queen. Black played bishop e6, protecting this pawn on d5, and now there's another pretty cool thing. So there is a move knight to e5. Now, why should white play this move instantaneously? It's because if not, black is ready to castle, perhaps kingside, which will unpin this knight on c6. And after that, it will be too late to try to make use of this pin. Therefore, white should hurry and make use of the pin right now. So knight e5 puts more pressure to this pinned knight. And black trades off, which is nice for white, because now black does not have a counterpart, his own dark squared bishop, while white's dark squared bishop is still strong. Black was here sick and tired of this pin, and he decided to play pawn to a6, so white trades off over here, and now it castles queenside. Now, white could have castled kingside just as well, but I castled queenside, and you'll see why in a second. After black castles, there is a common idea that thanks to this battery of queen and bishop, you can actually create a very powerful attack against black's king. And one of the common ideas is to push the pawn forward, g4, g5, trying to get rid of this knight from f6 so that it clears the path for our battery along this diagonal. And g4 is quite a cool move because black cannot capture it with his own bishop, that would drop the queen. If instead black captures it with the knight, that would lead to a variation similar to what happened in the actual game. In the actual game, black did not capture this pawn, but instead played knight d7, trying to get rid of this annoying queen because it is currently attacked. But, white can still use the power of this diagonal, and after knight takes d5, black actually resigned. Now, what's the catch here? Well, first of all, you can see that this knight sack opens up this diagonal. Now there is nothing there, and queen takes g7 is coming. And therefore, if black wants to stop that and capture white's queen here, then after knight takes e7 check to the king, and after king moves, bishop takes e5, white grabs the knight, and white is currently up a piece with a winning position. In the next game, I'm playing black, so I'm playing here pawn to b6. By the way, if you haven't watched my video about this opening, where I cover exactly how you play it as black, I'll drop a link down below and somewhere up there so that you can check it out later. Anyway, white goes pawn d4, bishop b7. And white decided to play here knight to d2. And it's actually something that advanced players sometimes play. Because as we saw in the previous example, when your opponent goes knight to c3, that enables you to play e6 and then to establish this annoying pin. That's why sometimes your opponents will play knight to d2, hoping that keeps them fully covered. Anyway, let's see what happened next. e6, black's plan is still the same, bishop d3, knight f6, queen e2, white overprotects this pawn on e4, but what you gotta do in that case is to hit the other one, pawn c5. So now this pawn is undefended, and that's where black targets his attack. White decided to solidify it, and here I played knight c6, which is inaccurate. It was better to first trade pawns here and then play knight c6 with the same idea, but without allowing a little tactical trick that white could have used here. In the game, I didn't notice he played pawn e5 here, but it was stronger for white to play pawn d5. And that's why I said that it was better for black to trade off these two pawns earlier. Because without these two pawns, this knight could have jumped to either d4 or b4, and both cases would be pretty cool for black. But now, because these pawns are still alive, this pawn controls these squares and black cannot do that. So then I would have to jump to e5 instead, which is okay, but less aggressive. So it was better for black to first trade pawns and only then to develop the knight over here. Anyway, luckily for me, my opponent didn't notice this idea and he played pawn e5, which looks aggressive, but in fact, it kind of helps black. And it goes here to d5, this pawn on d4 is still under the attack, white defends it. And here, after an exchange on d4, there is another common idea for black on how to attack. So I played knight to b4, attacking this bishop. And the point is, the bishop cannot really go away too much because it has to guard the c2 square just as well. From here, then I would fork the king and the rook. And so, for example, I can't go here because of knight c2 with this fork. Okay, and if white wants to save his bishop because it's his most active piece, which can be very useful in a middle game, he's gonna drop the bishop back to b1, which is what my opponent did. But that actually makes things even worse for white. Because here, black had to move knight f4, which is very strong, or another one which I played in the game, bishop to a6, hitting the queen. Notice that the bishop is protected by the knight, which is nice. Now the queen has to move, so white played queen e4, but now, thanks to this bishop that cuts off white's king, white can no longer castle, and he's kind of stuck in the center of the board. I played rook c8 because black has this active c-file, and it actually hits the bishop, and my opponent even blundered it. He played pawn a3. Again, remember, these are bullet games, so both players are playing very quickly, so white just overlooked that rook to c1 is a checkmate in one. And white could have defended the bishop somehow, but his position is actually lost already, and it's useful to know these attacking patterns for black, because you see that it's very easy to unleash this attack. And I played all these moves not because I'm such a brilliant-minded person, but because I knew all these attacking patterns up front. In this game I'm playing white again, and in this case it was a more normal game where there was nothing really fancy going on in an opening. So here I prefer keeping it flexible. I don't move my d pawn, neither to d4 or d3, I just want to keep some flexibility, so that white can decide what to do next depending on what black chooses to play. In the game, black played pawn to c6. Sometimes if your opponent goes instead pawn c5, which is kind of more aggressive, you can then trade here, and after d4, try to create this isolated pawn for black in the future, which you can attack in the middle game. So that's why I said that it's useful for white to keep it flexible. In the game though, that didn't happen. Black just played pawn to c6, and in that case white can just play straightforward d4, grab in the center. Black played it a little bit passive, so now white can expand. Black played a5, and now just both sides simply develop their pieces. Nothing extraordinary. Rook e8 and pawn e4. So that's what you do when black plays a little bit passively. You can develop your pieces comfortably and then challenge his center. Now this pawn is threatening to go forward and to drive away this knight. And therefore black decided to trade off on e4. Knight takes, bishop takes. The bishop from here also attacked this pawn, therefore black defended it. Now knight goes to e5, so white puts up more pressure. Now this pawn is once again attacked twice. And if black decides to trade off knights, that's not bad for white because the rook is getting really active along the d-file, so that's pretty cool. Instead, in the game, black did not do this. He played queen to c7, defending the pawn that way, and it's a perfectly normal move, like standard move for any opening, but in this particular case it misses a tactical trick. Bishop takes h7. It's somewhat similar to a Greek gift sacrifice. After king takes, white has queen to h5, check to the king. The king has to move back, but now thanks to this knight, which is still alive, white has queen takes f7. And now after king moves here, white can lift the rook, and after rook d3, black has no defense against rook h3 checkmate, so black just resigned. By the way, besides the b3 opening, which I would encourage you to try out, especially in Blitz,